The HOA president showed up at my ranch with a bulldozer convoy and a fake emergency order, demanding I tear down my family's 102-year-old barn in 24 hours. She insulted my dead grandfather to my face, sent goons to trespass on my land. And when that didn't break me, she cut my fence in the middle of the night and nearly got my horses killed by a semi-truck on the highway. She thought she was dealing with some country rancher who'd roll over and let her bulldoze 4 generations of Thompson family history so she could expand her precious beige subdivision. She had no idea I was a civil engineer who just discovered her entire HOA empire was built on land she didn't even own, and I was about to buy the ground right out from under her feet, raise her rent tenfold, and watch her read a public confession of every crime she'd committed while 500 of her own neighbors chanted for her resignation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Marcus Thompson, and the first thing you should know about me is that I trust dirt more than people. Dirt doesn't lie. It tells you if it's thirsty, if it's tired, if it's been walked on by something it doesn't know. People, on the other hand, lie like it's a sport. They'll smile right in your face while their brain is cooking up a way to take what's yours. My grandfather taught me that right here on this land, the Thompson Ranch, 160 acres of stubborn Blackwood County soil that's been in my family for 4 generations. He'd say, "Marcus, son, a man's character is like a fence post. It either stands up straight in a storm, or it rots from the inside out and falls over when a stray dog leans on it." I've tried to be a good fence post. I went to college, got a degree in civil engineering, learned how to make things stand up straight for a living. But I always came back here. This ranch, with its creaking barn and dusty fields, is more a part of me than my own bones. Which is why when Victoria Hayes' pristine white SUV pulled up to my gate, kicking up a cloud of disrespect, I already knew this wasn't a social call. Victoria Hayes was the president of the Blackwood Creek Estates Homeowners Association, a fancy name for the sprawling beige-colored subdivision that had sprouted up next to my property 10 years ago, like a patch of particularly aggressive fungus. She stepped out of her car, looking like she was about to host a garden party. All crisp linen and a smile so tight it looked like it was holding her face on. Beside her, a man in a cheap suit and a county ID badge looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. His name was Peters, and his tie was crooked. I leaned against my fence, not bothering to open the gate. My hands were covered in grease from working on the old tractor, and I made a point of wiping them on my already stained jeans. I adjusted my grandfather's old cowboy hat, a battered brown Stetson he'd worn every day of his life, and waited for whatever fresh nonsense was about to come out of her mouth. "Marcus," Victoria said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness like honey poured over poison. "So good to see you. We just have a little matter of official business." She gestured to the nervous man beside her. "This is Mr. Peters from the county planning office." I nodded at Peters. He flinched. "Ma'am, sir." I kept my voice flat. "Something I can help you with?" "Well, yes," Victoria chirped, pulling a thick envelope from a leather portfolio. "It's about the structure." She waved a dismissive hand toward the barn. My barn. The one my great-grandfather built with his own 2 hands out of timber he felled himself. The one where my grandpa taught me how to mend a saddle and read the sky. It was old, sure, the paint was peeling, and it leaned a little to the north, same as it had for 50 years, but it was solid oak and stubborn will, just like the men who built it. To me, it was a cathedral. To her, it was an eyesore. "The barn," I said, my voice getting a little tight. "It's been standing there for 102 years. It's not going anywhere." "That's just it, Marcus," she said, her smile widening into something predatory. "It is." She paused for effect. "Mr. Peters conducted an emergency inspection this morning." She said emergency like it was a word she just learned and was very proud of. "He found your entire property to be a significant public hazard. The barn, the fencing, the outbuildings, all of it. Unstable. A threat to the community." I felt a cold needle slide down my spine. "Your entire property," Victoria said, her eyes glittering with barely concealed triumph. "The whole ranch, I'm afraid. The county has determined that the structures pose an imminent danger. We're not just talking about the barn anymore, Marcus. We're talking about everything. I looked at Peters. He was sweating, staring at a spot on the ground somewhere near my boots. An emergency inspection he'd done from the road a quarter-mile away with binoculars, I presumed. I'm a civil engineer. I know structurally sound buildings when I see them. I also know a load of bull when I smell it. And this reeked. A threat to what community? I asked, gesturing around at my empty fields. The gophers? The deer have filed a complaint? Victoria's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold. That was the real Victoria, the one who lurked behind the polite facade. A threat to the aesthetic value and safety of Blackwood Creek Estates, she corrected smoothly. The bylaws are very clear. Any structure deemed hazardous by a county official must be rectified. She paused, savoring the moment. And Marcus, a little free advice. That farmhouse of yours? I'd start packing. Once the demolition crews are done, there won't be much left to live in. She slid a single piece of paper from the envelope and held it out. I didn't take it. Peters, looking miserable, stepped forward and clipped it to my fence. It was an official-looking document covered in stamps and angry red letters. The words "Emergency Abatement Order" jumped out at me. It said I had 24 hours to begin demolition of all structures on the property. 24 hours. If I failed to comply, the HOA, under a special county provision she had apparently lobbied for, had the right to hire a contractor to do it for me and place a lien on my property for the cost. A lien so big it would choke a horse. It was a declaration of war printed on county letterhead. "You can't be serious," I said, the hot-headed part of me starting to bubble up. "You think you can just show up and tell me to tear down 4 generations of my family's history because it doesn't match your beige houses?" "It's not me, Marcus. It's the law," she said. "The picture of innocence. We're just concerned citizens. We have to protect our property values." She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that only I could hear. "You know, your grandfather was just as stubborn. Refused every offer we made him. Look where it got him, dead in his bed, alone, surrounded by all this worthless dirt. I'm giving you a chance he never had. Take the buyout, walk away, or lose everything." The mention of my grandfather hit me like a punch to the gut. She saw it too. Her smile widened. 24 hours, Marcus," she said louder now, stepping back. "For the good of the community." She turned and glided back to her SUV, leaving Peters to scurry after her. I watched them drive away, a plume of dust settling on the official notice. I looked from the paper to the barn and back again. She had just made this personal. She had dragged my dead grandfather into her petty power play. She thought she was dealing with some country rancher who would crumble at the first sign of pressure. She had no idea who she'd just picked a fight with. She had poked the bear. Now the bear was going to start engineering. After Victoria and her pet inspector drove off, I stood there for a long time just staring at that piece of paper clipped to my fence. 24 hours. The clock was already ticking. It felt like a personal insult, a violation. This land wasn't just property to me. It was a living record of my family. Every fence post my grandpa hammered in, every field he plowed, every stone in the barn's foundation was a sentence in our story. And Victoria Hayes wanted to bulldoze the whole book because she didn't like the cover. The initial shock wore off fast, replaced by a slow-burning anger that settled deep in my gut. This wasn't just a notice, it was a threat. And I don't take kindly to threats, especially not on my own turf. But anger wasn't going to save my ranch. I had less than a day before bulldozers could legally roll onto my property. I unclipped the paper and ran back to the house. The screen door slammed behind me. I didn't have time to stew. I needed to act. I grabbed my phone and called my best buddy, Jerome. Jerome wasn't a lawyer. He was a mechanic with a garage in town, but he had a PhD in common sense and knew everyone in the county. "Jerome, I need you to find me the best lawyer in the county right now. The kind that doesn't scare easy." "Whoa, slow down. What happened?" "Victoria Hayes just gave me 24 hours to tear down my entire ranch, or she's doing it for me and billing me into bankruptcy." There was a long pause. "She's finally lost her mind. Okay, I know a guy. Margaret Chen. She's handled HOA cases before. Beat them too. I'll text you her number. I hung up and dialed Margaret Chen before Jerome's text even came through. She answered on the second ring, and I explained everything in about 90 seconds flat. 24 hours for a full property abatement? She said, her voice sharp with disbelief. That's not just aggressive, that's procedurally insane. There are notification requirements, appeal periods, environmental reviews. They're trying to steamroll you before you can mount a defense. Can you stop them? I can try. I'm filing an emergency injunction right now. But Marcus, I need you to do something. I need you to stall. If they show up with equipment before I get in front of a judge, you need to delay them. Legally? How? Get creative. You're an engineer, right? Engineers are good at that. I hung up and called Jerome back. So, he asked, what's the plan? Lawyers filing an injunction. Hearings at 10 tomorrow. I need to hold them off until then. Hold them off? How? You going to build a moat? I'm thinking of just standing in front of the bulldozers and hoping they don't want to add vehicular manslaughter to their resume. There was a pause. That's either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. You want company? I want you to stay by your phone in case I need bail money. Jerome laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. You got it, brother. Give 'em hell. The next morning, I was parked at the end of my driveway at 5 a.m., a thermos of coffee in one hand and my phone in the other. Margaret had said the injunction hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. I had to hold the line for 5 hours. Sleep had been impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw bulldozers rolling through my barn, through my grandfather's memory, through everything that made this place home. At 6:15, I saw them coming. A convoy of yellow machinery rolling down the county road like an invading army. 2 bulldozers, their steel treads grinding against the pavement. A backhoe with its arm folded like a scorpion's tail. A flatbed truck carrying industrial demolition equipment. Behind them all, Victoria's white SUV, gleaming in the early morning sun like a general's command vehicle. My heart started pounding, but I forced myself to stay still, to look calm. They pulled up to my gate in a cloud of diesel exhaust. Victoria stepped out, and for the first time, I saw what she'd worn to my execution. A crimson-red blazer that fit like armor tailored to perfection, draped open to reveal a black silk V-neck blouse beneath, cut low and elegant. The blazer matched her glossy red heels clicking against the gravel. A fitted red pencil skirt hugged her frame, the color so bold it looked like she'd dressed for war. Her chestnut hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, lips painted the same vibrant red as her suit. She looked like a corporate executioner who dressed for the occasion. A hard hat perched ridiculously on her perfectly styled hair, flanked by a foreman in a safety vest and 2 other men, probably contractors she'd hired. She was practically glowing with anticipation. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, her voice bright and cheerful, the way a cat's voice would be if it could talk to a trapped mouse. "We're here to help you with your little compliance issue. Step aside, please." I didn't move. "The injunction hearing is in 4 hours. You're not touching anything." Victoria laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Injunction? How cute. You actually think some piece of paper is going to save you?" She gestured at the machinery behind her, the crimson blazer pulling taut as she raised her arm with theatrical flair. "The 24 hours are up, Marcus. The law is clear. We have every right to proceed." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I told you what would happen if you didn't cooperate. Your grandfather learned the hard way that stubbornness doesn't pay. Now you get to learn the same lesson." She straightened and turned to the foreman. "Begin demolition. Start with the barn." The foreman, a weathered man in his 50s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't know about this. He says there's a hearing. There's no injunction yet," Victoria snapped, her red lips pursing in disapproval. "Move. Now. Unless you want me to find a contractor who isn't afraid of one man standing in a driveway." The bulldozer engine roared to life, belching black smoke. The massive machine lurched forward, its treads chewing up the gravel as it approached my gate. I stepped forward, planting myself directly in the path of the bulldozer. I could feel the vibration through my boots, smell the hot metal and diesel. The operator stared down at me, his face uncertain. "Stop!" I shouted over the engine. "You take one piece of that equipment onto my property without a court order, and I will have every single one of you arrested for trespassing. I will sue you," I pointed at the operator, "and you, the foreman, and you, Victoria, personally for destruction of property, emotional distress, and anything else my lawyer can think of. Your names will be on every document. Your houses, your bank accounts, everything you own." The bulldozer stopped, engine idling. The foreman stepped forward. "Ma'am, he's got a point. If there's any question about the legality, there is no question." Victoria's composure was cracking, her voice rising. "I have the paperwork. The county signed off." "Actually," I said, holding up my phone with a steady hand that took every ounce of willpower, "my lawyer just texted me. The judge issued a temporary restraining order 15 minutes ago. Emergency filing." I was bluffing. My phone screen was just showing my lock screen, but I kept my face stone cold. "You want to test it?" I continued. "Drive that bulldozer right through me. But I've got the sheriff's number on speed dial. Contempt of court is a criminal offense, as in jail time." The foreman took a step back. The bulldozer operator killed his engine. One of the contractors was already walking to his truck. Victoria's face went through a fascinating series of colors, red to purple to sickly white. A vein in her forehead was pulsing, visible even from where I stood. The crimson blazer seemed to sag slightly on her shoulders as her confidence wavered. The standoff lasted a full, silent minute. Then Victoria's phone buzzed. She looked at it and her expression curdled. "We'll be back," she hissed. "This isn't over." "No," I agreed, watching her climb back into her SUV, the crimson blazer wrinkling as she moved. "It's just getting started." The convoy retreated down the road. I stood until they disappeared around the bend. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "TRO. Granted, they can't touch you for 30 days. Nice stall. How did you know?" I stared at the message, then at my shaking hands. I hadn't known. I'd been playing poker with an empty hand. I sat down right there in the dirt. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore. Round one was mine, but Victoria's parting words echoed. This wasn't over. Not even close. The temporary restraining order bought me time, but it didn't solve the problem. Victoria couldn't bring in the bulldozers, but she could and did double down on the harassment. That's when her volunteers started showing up. They weren't official. They were just a couple of guys from the subdivision who had way too much time on their hands and a deep-seated desire to feel important. I'd see them parked on the road by my property line, pointing long-lensed cameras at my barn, at my house. They were taking pictures, documenting every peeling paint chip, every loose board, building a so-called dossier of decay. It was petty, it was invasive, and it was designed to break me. But Victoria wasn't just targeting me. I heard the stories from Jerome, who heard them at the diner, who heard them from everyone in town. She had a pattern. Old Mrs. Patterson, a widow 3 streets into the subdivision, had been fined $500 for having the wrong shade of beige on her shutters. A young couple, the Newens, had been threatened with legal action because their lawn was a 1/4 inch too long while they were on their honeymoon. A disabled veteran named Rodriguez had been told he couldn't have a wheelchair ramp in his front yard because it was aesthetically inconsistent with neighborhood standards. Victoria Hayes didn't just want power. She wanted people to suffer under it. She wanted them to know every single day that she controlled their lives, and anyone who pushed back got crushed. She had made a career out of bullying people who couldn't fight back. She had just made the mistake of picking on someone who could. One Saturday afternoon, I was out mending a fence when I saw them, 2 of Victoria's volunteers. One was a skinny guy named Todd who fancied himself Victoria's second-in-command. The other was a big, beefy guy I didn't recognize, who looked like he spent more time at the gym than at a job. They weren't on the road this time. They were on my property. They had stepped right over the fence and were walking toward the barn, cameras clicking away. That was it. That was the line. I dropped my tools and strode toward them, my blood starting to boil. "Get off my land," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Todd held up his hands in mock surrender, a smirk plastered across his face. "Easy there, cowboy. We're just documenting a public nuisance for the HOA. It's our civic duty." First of all, I'm not a cowboy. I'm a rancher. There's a difference. Cowboys work for other people. I work for myself. I took a step closer. Second, your civic duty ends at my fence line. You're trespassing. I'm telling you, once, leave now. Or what? Todd sneered. "You'll report us to the HOA? Oh, wait, we are the HOA. No. You're two idiots standing on private property without permission. There's a word for that. It's called trespassing. It's a crime. Even HOA volunteers can go to jail." The big guy stepped forward, puffing out his chest. He was a good 6 inches taller than me and probably had 50 pounds on me. All of it muscle. "You don't look so tough to me," he grunted, getting right in my face. His breath smelled like cheap energy drinks and bad decisions. Karen said, "You'd fold like a lawn chair." Guess she was right. That was the spark. My temper, which I usually keep on a pretty tight leash, snapped. I shoved him hard in the chest. I said, "Get out." He stumbled back, surprised. His face went from smug to furious. He balled his fists. "You just made a big mistake, pal." He lunged at me. I sidestepped his clumsy haymaker and drove my elbow into his ribs. He grunted and swung again. I caught his arm, twisted, and used his momentum to throw him face first into the dirt. It wasn't pretty, but growing up on a ranch teaches you how to wrestle things a lot bigger and meaner than some gym rat. He hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of him. Todd just stood there, frozen, his camera hanging limply at his side. "You want some too?" I asked him. He ran, just turned and bolted for the road like his pants were on fire. I looked down at the big guy, who was groaning and clutching his ribs. "Get off my land," I said, "and tell Victoria that if she sends anyone else, they'll leave in an ambulance." He stumbled to his feet and limped away without another word. 10 minutes later, Sheriff Mark Dugan's cruiser pulled up. He was a good man, fair and level-headed, but the look on his face said he already knew what had happened. "Marcus," he said, getting out of the car, "I just got a call saying you assaulted 2 men. They were trespassing. One of them threw the first punch. I defended myself." Mark sighed. I figured, Todd's already changed his story twice since he called it in. The other guy won't press charges, probably embarrassed he got his clock cleaned. He gave me a long, serious look. "But Marcus, you need to be careful. These people are looking for a reaction. They want you to do something they can use against you in court. Don't give it to them." "What am I supposed to do, Mark? Let them walk all over me?" "No," he said. "You use your head. Beat them with the law, not with your fists, because I'm telling you, Victoria Hayes is playing for keeps. This is only going to get worse." He paused. "And between you and me, watch your back. She doesn't fight fair." He was right. The near fight was exactly what they wanted. I had let my hot-headed nature get the better of me. I watched his cruiser drive away, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Victoria's next move was going to be worse, and I had a sick feeling I knew exactly where she'd hit me. Sheriff Dugan's warning echoed in my head for days. Watch your back. She doesn't fight fair. I should have listened more closely. I should have seen it coming. Victoria couldn't use lawyers and bulldozers yet, so she decided to come at me from a different angle in the dead of night. She decided to go after my horses. I have 3 horses. Apollo, a big, gentle giant of a palomino my grandpa bought me for my 16th birthday. Scout, a feisty little mare who's smarter than most people I know. And Belle, an old girl we rescued years ago who just likes to spend her days dozing in the sun. They aren't just livestock, they're family. And Victoria somehow must have known that. It happened on a Tuesday night. The air was still and quiet, one of those nights where the only sound is the chirping of crickets. I fell into a deep sleep around 10. It was a sound that woke me, a frantic, high-pitched whinny followed by the thunder of hooves on hard-packed dirt moving fast. Too fast. My eyes snapped open. That was the sound of panicked horses. I threw on my boots and ran outside, not even bothering with pants over my boxers. The moon was bright enough to see by, casting long, eerie shadows across the pasture. And the pasture was empty. The gate was swinging wide open. But that wasn't right. I never leave the gate open. I check it 3 times every night before bed. I ran to the fence line that bordered the main road, a 2-lane county highway where cars tend to go a lot faster than the speed limit. My blood ran cold. There, in the moonlight, I saw it. A clean, neat cut right through the wire fencing. Not a break, not a rust spot that gave way. A cut. 2 of them, top and bottom, made with bolt cutters. This was deliberate. This was sabotage. A wave of pure terror washed over me. My horses spooked, and running blind in the dark were heading straight for the highway. I sprinted across the field, my bare feet pounding against the cool earth, yelling their names into the night. I could hear them up ahead, crashing through the underbrush. Then I heard something else, the high-pitched whine of tires on pavement. Headlights cut through the darkness, bearing down on the exact spot where the fence was cut. A semi-truck, probably on a late-night haul, was coming around the bend. "No!" I screamed, pushing myself harder. I burst through the line of trees just as Apollo, his eyes wide with fear, bolted out onto the pavement, directly into the path of the truck. The truck's horn blared. The driver slammed on his brakes, the squeal of rubber and the smell of burning tires filling the air. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the massive grille of the truck, Apollo frozen in the headlights, the driver's horrified face. Then, Scout, my smart, brave little mare, did something incredible. She ran up behind Apollo and slammed her body into his side, knocking him off balance and pushing him off the road just as the truck skidded past, missing him by inches. The truck fishtailed, its trailer swinging wildly before screeching to a halt 100 yards down the road. I stood there, panting, my heart about to explode. Apollo was trembling, his coat slick with sweat. Scout stood beside him, nudging him with her nose. Belle had stopped short of the road, looking bewildered under a tree. The truck driver climbed down, his face pale. "What in the Sam Hill was that? Your horse nearly became a hood ornament." "I know. I'm sorry." I was gasping, running my hands over Apollo, checking for injuries. He was shaken, but okay. I grabbed his mane, burying my face in his neck, overwhelmed with relief so intense it made my knees buckle. After the driver left, I spent the next hour coaxing the horses back and patching the fence. My hands were shaking the whole time. I stopped and looked at those clean cuts in the wire. This was attempted murder. Maybe not of me, but of my animals, of whoever might have been driving on that road. Victoria Hayes had crossed a line there was no coming back from. But then something caught my eye. In the mud near the fence, a footprint, a clear, distinctive tread pattern. And about 10 feet away, caught on a piece of barbed wire, a scrap of fabric, blue, like a uniform shirt. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything. Every angle, every detail. Victoria wanted to play dirty? Fine. But she had just left evidence, and I was about to become very, very good at collecting it. The incident with the horses changed everything. The fight was no longer about a barn or a bylaw. It was about survival. My anger had cooled into something much more dangerous, methodical, patient rage. Victoria thought her power came from the HOA's rule book. I had a hunch her real power and her greatest weakness was buried somewhere deeper. The next morning, I drove to the Blackwood County Records Office, a drab building that smells of dust and weak coffee. To me, it was a treasure trove. Every property line, deed, easement, and covenant recorded for a century. I spent hours in the dusty basement with massive plat books. The clerk, George, watched with mild curiosity as I requested original records for the entire area, dating back to the 1,950 seconds. I traced the history as parcels got sold and subdivided. Then I found a note in the margin of a 1,978 survey referring to a master ground lease for a large commercial parcel in what would become the subdivision. A ground lease. That got my attention. It means you own the building but rent the dirt underneath. I need the file for Master Ground Lease 78B, Parcel 4. I told George. He returned with a thin, dusty folder. The documents were typed on an old manual typewriter, but the words were crystal clear. In 1978, the O'Malley family had sold most of their land to developers, but for one key 5-acre parcel, they had only leased it for 50 years. The lease was set to expire soon. And on that parcel, the developers had built everything: the clubhouse, tennis courts, swimming pool, the HOA's main office, and a block of rental townhomes. The Blackwood Creek Estates HOA didn't even own the ground its headquarters sat on. They were tenants. Better still, the lease had a clause stating that upon expiration, rates could be renegotiated at current market value or terminated. If terminated, ownership of all structures would revert to the ground lease holder. This was the weapon. If I could get control of that lease, I'd become the HOA's landlord. I'd own the ground beneath their feet. Finding the O'Malley heirs was easy. A few online searches gave me their names: 2 sisters in Florida, a brother in Arizona. The original couple had passed away, and the lease was a small, forgotten investment to them. I spent an evening on the phone explaining my situation honestly, a powerful HOA trying to run my family off our land. Something resonated. After discussing it amongst themselves, they agreed to sell me the lease rights. There was just one problem: the price. Even though it was a bargain for what it represented, it was still more money than I had. A lot more. I liquidated my stocks. I sold equipment, the borrowed cattle trailer, the post-hole digger. The hardest was my grandpa's John Deere tractor, the old 420 he bought new in 1968. Selling it felt like cutting off a limb. A neighboring rancher named Henderson bought it, promising to sell it back for the same price if I ever could. Even after all that, I was still short. I was sitting at my kitchen table, head in my hands, when my phone rang. "Is this Marcus Thompson?" "It is. My name is Trevor Hale. Mr. Henderson suggested I give you a call. I understand you're trying to acquire a certain ground lease, and you've hit a capital shortfall. I'd like to propose a partnership." We met the next day at a small coffee shop. He listened intently as I laid out the entire story. When I finished, he took a slow sip of coffee. "Hayes," he said, the name tasting foul. "Her husband's construction company tried to use eminent domain to seize a piece of my land 5 years ago. I spent $1 million in legal fees to stop them." Something hard passed through his eyes. "I don't like bullies, Mr. Thompson." He pulled out a checkbook. "This isn't a loan, it's an investment. I'll provide the remaining capital for a 49% stake. You have controlling interest, I'll be silent." He wrote out a check for the exact amount I needed. "My only condition: when the time comes, show them no mercy." I took the check, my hand trembling slightly. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything, just win." With Trevor's backing, everything moved at lightning speed. I set up Blackwood Land Holdings LLC to act as the buyer and contacted the O'Malleys to finalize the deal. We hired a lawyer in another county to keep everything quiet. The plan was to close via wire transfer, clean, efficient, and secret. Too secret, apparently. A few days later, I got a call from the eldest O'Malley sister, her voice shaky. "Mr. Thompson, we got another call today." A very aggressive woman, a lawyer representing the Blackwood Creek Estates HOA. My stomach dropped. What did she want? She said she heard we were selling the lease. She told us it would be a violation of the original agreement, which our lawyer says is a lie, and that the HOA was prepared to offer us more than you did. A lot more. Victoria knew. I didn't know how, but she knew. This was now a race. 2020. "She said she's wiring the funds tomorrow morning," the sister continued. "She told us to either accept or face a lawsuit." "Hold firm," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "Don't talk to her again. Let your lawyer handle any communication. We're closing our deal tomorrow morning. We will beat her to the punch." I called Trevor immediately. His voice went ice cold. "She's trying to preempt the sale. Classic corporate rating. If her wire gets there first, Her lawyers tie it up in court for years. We cannot let that happen. My transfer is scheduled for 9 a.m. Not good enough. I'm calling my banker tonight. Everything will be pre-approved. Be at the bank the second those doors unlock. Every second counts. I didn't sleep that night. By 4 a.m., I gave up pretending. I made coffee. I paced. I checked my phone 100 times. I was at the bank at 8:15, standing on the sidewalk like a man waiting for Black Friday. Susan, the branch manager, gave me a funny look as she unlocked the doors at 8:30. I was through them before she could say good morning. Marcus, everything okay? I need to authorize a wire transfer, immediately. Blackwood Land Holdings. She tapped at her computer. Mr. Hale's office called. Everything's ready. Just need your signature. I scribbled my name so fast it was barely legible. When does it go through? Processing. Processing. Done. Time-stamped 8:33 a.m. I gripped the counter to keep my balance. I walked out on rubber legs and called the O'Malley sister. Did it arrive? 5 minutes ago, she said, still in her voice. And Mr. Thompson, not 2 minutes after yours came through, we got another wire. Much bigger. From the HOA's lawyers. 2 minutes. That's how close we came to losing everything. We're refusing their transfer, she said. Our lawyer is drafting a letter informing Miss Hayes that the asset was already sold to you. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. I could picture Victoria's face when she got that call, the confusion, the disbelief, the slow, dawning horror as she realized the ranch kid just outmaneuvered her. She was no longer the hunter, she was the prey. The game had changed. I was now the HOA's landlord, and rent was about to come due. Owning the ground lease felt like holding a royal flush in a poker game where everyone else thinks you've been bluffing. For a week, I did nothing. Let Victoria and the HOA board stew in uncertainty. While they scrambled, Jerome and I were in my workshop having the time of our lives. Bigger, I said, pointing at my computer screen. The letters need to be bigger. And angrier. Blood red, Jerome grinned, sanding down the edge of a 4x8 sheet of plywood. You want to scream. You are so screwed. But professionally. Exactly. Think foreclosure notice meets highway billboard. What about a picture? A nice photo of Victoria looking constipated? Tempting. But no. Let's keep it classy. Just the words. The words are enough. Rent increased 10x. Jerome read off my screen. That's beautiful. That's poetry. Shakespeare couldn't have written it better. Shakespeare never had to deal with an HOA. True, he just had plagues and monarchs. Way easier. We were building a sign, a massive 4x 8-foot sign painted a glaring white, our masterpiece, our declaration of war. A few nights later, under cover of darkness, we planted it right at the grand entrance of the Blackwood Creek Estates rental townhomes, the complex that sat on my newly acquired land. I was the landowner now. I could put up whatever sign I wanted. And, just for fun, we'd also had my lawyer draft up some very official-looking notice to vacate letters, not legally binding eviction notices, but close enough to cause a panic and slip them under every door in the complex. The next morning, I parked on the public road with a clear view and waited with a thermos of coffee and a bag of pastries Jerome had insisted I bring. You're going to want snacks for this show, he'd said. I adjusted Grandpa's old cowboy hat, crossed my arms, and waited. He wasn't wrong. It didn't take long. The first commuter, a man in a BMW, slowed down as he approached the exit, then slammed on his brakes so hard I heard the screech from across the street. He sat there for a full 30 seconds, reading and rereading the sign, before getting out of his car to take a picture. Then his wife came running out of their townhome in a bathrobe, waving one of our notice to vacate letters and screaming something I couldn't quite make out, but definitely included several words you don't say in church. Within 20 minutes, the entrance had become a full-blown circus. People poured out of their homes in pajamas and bathrobes, in business suits half-buttoned, in yoga pants and slippers. They stood in clusters, pointing at the sign, waving the eviction notices, shouting into phones. A woman in a silk robe was openly crying while clutching her letter. A man in a three-piece suit was red-faced, screaming at someone on his phone about lawyers and constitutional rights. One guy was trying to take a video for social media, while his wife had what appeared to be a complete nervous breakdown behind him. It was beautiful, it was chaos, it was exactly what I had planned. In huge blood-red letters, the sign read, "Attention tenants. This property is under new ownership. All leases are currently under review. Rent increased 10x effective immediately. All payments to be made to Blackwood Land Holdings, LLC." It was legal theater, of course. I couldn't actually change existing leases overnight, and those eviction notices weren't worth the paper they were printed on. But they didn't know that, and it was designed to do one thing: create absolute chaos and turn the HOA's own constituents against them. Around 8:30, Victoria's white SUV came screeching around the corner so fast she almost took out a mailbox. She didn't even park properly, just stopped in the middle of the street and practically fell out of the car. She was wearing that crimson-red blazer again, the one that looked like armor, paired with the matching red skirt and those glossy heels. Her chestnut hair was still perfectly styled, red lips painted sharp, but this time, the armor looked different, less confident, more desperate. A resident immediately ran up to her, shoving one of the eviction notices in her face and screaming, "What is this? What did you do?" Victoria shoved him aside and stormed toward the sign. Her face, when she read it, was a masterpiece. It went through disbelief, then confusion, then dawning horror, and finally settled into pure, undiluted fury. The fake polite mask was gone. This was the real Victoria, unfiltered, unhinged, and absolutely livid. She spotted me across the street, leaning against my truck with a thick folder of legal documents under one arm and a clipboard in the other, taking notes like a satisfied building inspector. I was the property owner now, and I looked the part. Cowboy hat, confident stance, official paperwork in hand. I tipped my hat at her, just a little. A cowboy greeting. She stormed over, her heels digging into the soft shoulder so hard she was leaving divots. One heel actually got stuck in the mud, and she had to yank it free, nearly falling on her face in the process. A couple of residents actually laughed. That only made her angrier. The crimson blazer pulled taut across her shoulders as she moved, her whole body rigid with rage. "What?" she said, her voice a barely controlled screech. "Is the meaning of this?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of coffee. "Morning, Victoria. Beautiful day, isn't it? Perfect weather for property management. Take that sign down immediately. And those fake eviction notices? That's fraud. That's illegal. Fraud?" I placed a hand over my heart in mock offense. "I'm hurt. Those aren't eviction notices. They're notices to vacate. Very different. Just a friendly heads up that their tenancy is under review. Completely legal. I had my lawyer check twice." I smiled. "You of all people should appreciate the importance of proper notice procedures. I will have you arrested." "For what? Putting a sign on my own property? Sending letters to my own tenants?" I shrugged. "Go ahead, call the sheriff. I'll wait. Actually, you know what? I'll call him for you." I pulled out my phone. Mark and I go way back. I'm sure he'd love to hear about this. She actually sputtered like a broken engine trying to turn over. A resident in a business suit pushed through the growing crowd, holding both the eviction notice and a freshly printed invoice. His wife was right behind him, clutching her own eviction notice with trembling hands, her face a mask of shock. His face was the color of old oatmeal. "Is this for real? My rent just went from $2,000 to $20,000 and I'm being evicted?" I pulled a legal document from my folder and held it up for everyone to see. "This is the deed transfer, recorded with the county last week. I am the legal property owner of the land this entire complex sits on. Every townhome, every building, every square inch of dirt under your feet." I let that sink in. Those notices are real. The rent increase is real, and I suggest you all start asking your HOA president how she let this happen. Victoria snatched both papers, her eyes scanning the letterhead Blackwood Land Holdings, LLC. The realization hit her visibly. I could see the exact moment she understood that I owned the land under everything she'd built her power on. The crimson blazer sagged slightly as her shoulders slumped. This is, she was sputtering, words failing her for maybe the first time in her miserable life. Unfair? I suggested helpfully. Outrageous? Unprecedented? Feel free to pick an adjective. I've got time. It's very unfair, she finally managed, her voice cracking. And there it was, the beautiful, perfect moment. The woman who had tried to use fake rules and emergency orders to bulldoze my family's history, who had cut my fence and nearly killed my horses, who had terrorized an entire neighborhood with her petty tyranny, was standing there in front of her own angry constituents, surrounded by people waving eviction notices, whining that I was being unfair. I let a slow, satisfied smile spread across my face, the kind of smile a wolf gives a sheep right before dinner. Unfair, Victoria? I'm just a simple rancher. I tipped my hat again. A simple businessman. I've made a significant investment and I'm looking for a return. It's not personal. I spread my hands in mock innocence. It's just business. Isn't that what you always say when you're finding widows for the wrong shade of beige? When you're denying wheelchair ramps to disabled veterans? It's just business, right? Her face went from red to white so fast, I thought she might actually pass out. You will be hearing from our lawyers. I certainly hope so. I have a few things to discuss with them. The HOA office building, the clubhouse, the pool, they all sit on my land too. Their leases are under review. Similar adjustments are in order. I paused for effect. Unless the board wants to negotiate, I'm a reasonable man. Unlike some people, the crowd around us was growing. More residents were arriving. Some still in their pajamas, all of them angry, all of them looking for someone to blame, and they were starting to realize that someone wasn't me. You're a monster, Victoria whispered, her voice breaking. No, Victoria, I said, and my smile disappeared. My voice went flat and hard as a coffin nail. I'm a consequence. You started this war. You fired the first shot. You tried to destroy my family's legacy because you thought you could. You thought I was just some country rancher who'd roll over. I leaned in close enough that only she could hear me, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You were wrong, and now you're going to pay for it every single day, for the rest of your miserable life. I straightened up, tipped my hat one more time, and walked back to my truck. Behind me, the crowd closed in on Victoria like sharks smelling blood in the water. This is all your fault, Victoria. You did this to us. We trusted you. I didn't look back. I just climbed in my truck, started the engine, and drove away with a smile on my face and a song in my heart. The best part? This was just the opening move. The giant sign sent the community into full-blown panic. My lawyer called within days. The HOA's lawyer wanted an emergency meeting. They were ready to negotiate. The board session was held in the community clubhouse, a building that now sat on my land. I walked in a few minutes late, on purpose. The room fell silent. 7 board members sat at a long table, Victoria at the head looking haggard, the others looking terrified. I didn't sit. I walked to the front and stood before them. Good evening. I'm Marcus Thompson, managing partner of Blackwood Land Holdings LLC, your new landlord. Arthur, the treasurer, cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, we're here to discuss your predatory rental demands. You cannot increase rents by 1,000%. I smiled. It was not a friendly smile. You're right. I can't do that on existing residential leases. That was just an attention getter. Consider it my version of an emergency notice. Relief flickered in their eyes. I let them enjoy it for 3 seconds. However, the master lease for the commercial properties is different. Per the 1978 agreement, upon transfer of ownership, rates are subject to renegotiation at current market value. I slid documents across the table. The old lease had you paying $12,000 a year. The new rate will be $120,000 per month. The room erupted. Insane. Extortion. We'll never pay that. I held up a hand. That's $1.4 million annually. Add the townhome income I'll be collecting when those leases expire, and the total loss to your budget is around $2 million a year. Your constituents will be paying for your president's vendetta for the next decade. Victoria spoke, her voice a growl. What do you want? Thompson? A legally binding covenant. 3 conditions. I held up one finger. 1. My ranch is permanently exempt from all HOA rules. Forever. A second finger. 2. You pay for complete restoration of my barn. Every cent. A third finger. 3. Your president reads a public apology at a community meeting. Written by me. She admits to everything, the fake reports, the harassment, the sabotage. Victoria went purple. Absolutely not. I will not be humiliated. Would you rather the HOA collapse? Would you rather every homeowner get a $40,000 special assessment? I leaned forward. Those are your options, door A or door B. There is no door C. I placed the covenant on the table. 72 hours. After that, the offer expires, and the new lease terms go into effect. I walked out without another word. The board, faced with a choice between financial ruin and throwing their leader under the bus, chose the bus. They voted 6-1 to accept my terms. Victoria was the lone holdout, overruled by her own people. The covenant protecting my ranch was signed and notarized. A check for the barn restoration was promised. All that remained was the apology. The community meeting was held in the local high school auditorium. Every homeowner who could make it was there, angry, confused, looking for someone to blame. I sat in the second row with Jerome. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to see it through. The board went through preliminary business. Then the treasurer stood up. As many of you know, we recently faced a significant challenge related to historical land lease agreements. After negotiation, we've reached a settlement. However, a condition is a formal statement from our president. Know and defirst, Victoria Hayes. Victoria walked to the podium. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, stripped of power. She was wearing that crimson red blazer again, but this time it looked different. The tailored fit seemed loose on her frame. The red heels that had clicked with such authority now seemed too loud, too garish. Her chestnut hair wasn't as perfectly styled. Her red lips trembled. The crimson suit that had been armor now looked like a costume she couldn't quite pull off anymore. Her hands trembled as she unfolded a piece of paper, the apology I had written. She began reading, her voice flat and robotic. I am here tonight to issue a formal apology. I, Victoria Hayes, in my capacity as president, engaged in a targeted campaign of harassment against my neighbor, Mr. Marcus Thompson. The crowd murmured. I abused my office. I knowingly used a falsified report from a county inspector to issue an unjust demolition order against Mr. Thompson's historic family barn. Gasps from the audience. Her neighbors were seeing her for what she was. I authorized volunteers to trespass on his property. I was involved in acts of sabotage and intimidation that endangered livestock and put motorists at risk. That line wasn't in my original draft. I looked at Jerome. He shrugged. Apparently, the board's lawyers had insisted she take responsibility for everything to limit their liability. My actions were not in the community's interest. They were born of personal vendetta and abuse of authority. They exposed every homeowner to immense legal and financial liability. Her voice cracked, barely audible now. I offer my deepest apologies to Mr. Heaven, Marcus Thompson, and to all residents of Blackwood Creek Estates. Silence. Then the dam broke. You lied to us! You used our money to attack a man's family! You could have gotten someone killed! The chant started. Resign! 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 Victoria stood frozen at the podium, watching her world crumble. The board members looked helpless. The crimson blazer hung awkwardly on her shoulders, wrinkled and defeated. Sheriff Dugan, standing near the back doors, caught my eye and gave me a small nod. Then he started walking toward the stage. I watched as he approached Victoria at the podium. The room went quiet. Mrs. Hayes, Sheriff Dugan said, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium. I have a few questions I'd like to ask you down at the station. About some evidence we recovered from a fence line, a footprint, a piece of fabric, and a very interesting statement from a county inspector named Peters, who decided his conscience was worth more than his job. Victoria's face went gray. The crimson blazer seemed to sag completely now. All the fight gone out of her. "You can come voluntarily," the sheriff continued. "Or I can make this official right here. Your choice." She went voluntarily. They walked out together, the crowd parting like the Red Sea, every single person staring at her with contempt. The woman who had ruled them with fear and fines for years, being led away by the sheriff while 500 of her former subjects watched in silence, her crimson-red suit, once a symbol of power, now looking like the costume of a disgraced tyrant. I found out later that Peters had flipped completely. Faced with perjury charges for the fake inspection report, he'd given up everything, emails, text messages, the whole conspiracy. Victoria was charged with filing false official documents, conspiracy to commit vandalism, and reckless endangerment for the horse incident. Her husband's construction company lost 3 major county contracts when the news broke. The state licensing board opened an investigation. She pleaded no contest to avoid a trial. The judge gave her 2 years probation, a hefty fine, and 200 hours of community service. The real punishment, though, was what happened after. No one in Blackwood County would look her in the eye. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. The country club revoked her membership. Her so-called friends disappeared like morning mist. 3 months later, a for sale sign went up in front of their house. I heard they moved to Arizona. I hope the HOA there is everything she deserves. The restoration crew finished the barn on a bright Saturday morning in October. They'd done beautiful work, new timbers married seamlessly with the old, the foundation reinforced with steel, a roof that would last a century. They had even preserved the maker's mark my great-grandfather had carved into the main beam. I stood in the doorway, running my hand along the wood, and for a moment I could swear I felt my grandpa standing beside me. Jerome's truck pulled up the drive. He got out holding 2 beers and handed me one. "Not bad," he said, looking at the barn. "Not bad at all. The HOA paid for every nail," I said. He laughed. "That's the best part. He clinked his bottle against mine. So what now? You going to keep being their landlord forever?" Signed a new 50-year lease last week. Original rate, $12,000 a year. You let them off easy. Maybe. I took a sip of my beer, but they'll remember. Every time they write that check, every time they drive past that sign at the entrance, they'll remember what happens when you mess with a Thompson. Sheriff Dugan's cruiser came up the road and pulled into my drive. He got out, leaning against the hood. "Heard the barn's done," he said. "Looks good. It'll outlast all of us." He nodded, looking out at the fields. "You know, when I told you to beat them with the law, I didn't expect you to become their landlord, get their president arrested, and make their whole board sign a surrender document. You said to be creative," he laughed. "That I did." He tipped his hat and drove off. I finished my beer, said goodbye to Jerome, and walked up the hill behind the house. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the pasture. Apollo, Scout, and Belle were grazing peacefully, safe behind a new fence that would never be cut again. Below, the barn stood straight and proud against the sea of beige houses in the distance. My grandpa used to say, "A man's character is like a fence post. Either it stands up straight in a storm, or it rots from the inside and falls over." Victoria Hayes had rotted from the inside a long time ago. She just didn't know it until I came along and gave her a push. I put on Grandpa's old Stetson, adjusted the brim, and headed back to the house. I had a ranch to run.